Creative Cauldron. Isn't that a good phrase? I like that because it implies that within the cauldron, you know, we can make a soup. We can make, you know, we can throw a bunch of stuff in and cook something up. And that, to a great extent, is what creativity is. It is a messy device. All creativity, whether it's music, whether it's art, whether it's film or theater, where it's costume, anything creative, anything that comes out of the mind of man or woman can get very messy and is never predictable. This is the difficulty about teaching something like this, is that there's a myriad of opinions and all of them may be right and all of them are probably wrong in some degree. And every approach is messy. And I think as human beings, when we see a final product, we tend to think, oh, that's perfection. You look at a Monet or any of those wonderful paintings or any painting that you like and you go, well, that just came out of whole cloth. And we see the result and we focus on the result. And especially in you know, North America, we're very results oriented, and we see careers of musicians and artists and film actors and stage people and the people that we admire, and we just assume that, you know, they were like that from beginning to end, and it's never that way. And what brought this to mind is I was watching a rather mediocre film, if you really want to know, about Hitchcock, Alfred Hitchcock. How many of you know who Alfred Hitchcock was? You don't, okay. Alfred Hitchcock was at one time and is still considered the greatest, I guess, horror picture filmmaker, but he didn't do just that. He made suspense films. He made so many innovations in the film world as a director that he was lionized and vilified. And he was by no means a perfect individual, and this movie is about the making of Psycho. How many of you have seen Psycho? Well, I am here to tell you, Psycho still holds up. I saw it in the theaters, which tells you I'm 108 years old, but it literally had people shrieking in the theater. And I was I'd never seen anything like it. It scared the living shit out of me, and every time I just watched it the other night, I'd seen it 6 times, and I know it's coming, and it's still fucking hard to take. And you gotta think about, that was a different world back then. And I wanna tell you the story about Psycho. He had come off a film that was received as lukewarm, and the one before that was kind of lukewarm. They're actually considered kind of masterpieces now, but back in the day, you know, it wasn't appreciated. And Anthony Hopkins, who I think is the greatest actor that is still alive that we have, and that includes Meryl Streep, but they're up there 1 and 2, I mean, right there, pick one. He does a caricature that still works, because Alfred Hitchcock, he actually had a TV series where he introduced his little 30-minute plays. They were all kind of horrible and dramatic and all that kind of stuff, and he used to play a little joke and do all this stuff, and he was Holmley was being kind to this man. He had a face only a mother could love, I'm telling you, and he was fat, and he also appeared in every film he was ever in. It's really interesting, because in one of the opening scenes in Psycho, you can see him outside on the street wearing a cowboy hat. Anyway, he was a troubled individual in many ways, but he was a genius. And he decided he owed Paramount Pictures, he was under contract, he owed them one film, and he wanted to do this movie called Psycho, which is based on a book. And a true story, by the way. And you also have to understand that in the 60s, where he was operating, the censors, there had never been a motion picture or a TV series that showed a toilet. You couldn't show a toilet. You couldn't, for most part, show a man and a woman, at least this is on television, in the same bed. All the series had separate beds with married couples and everything. I mean, this is America, okay? This is back in the day. So he wanted to show this story I'm not going to blow it for you. Let's just say the censors have many, many problems with this. And Paramount said, why would you want to do this disgusting, horrible, bloody fucking book, and we're not going to do it. And he was left with, if he wanted to do the movie, he was going to have to fund it with his own money. And believe me, he did not have a lot of it. He had, in that day he did, but it took every dime he had. And then he made a deal with Paramount that if in fact he put up his own money to do the film, they would still distribute it. What he didn't know is basically they had control over how many theaters they could distribute it in. So if they only wanted to put it out to 1 or 2 theaters, they could fuck him that way and cut their losses, of course. But he rolled the dice. And when he was finished with the first cut, he showed it to the producers and all the assholes at Paramount and everybody else that, was pertinent to the process. And it was a disaster. They hated it. And based on that, they said they were only going to release it in two theaters. They were big theaters, but the main ones in Hollywood. But they weren't going to distribute it, which meant it would be a total disaster. So he and his wife also have an interesting arrangement, and you see all the troubles and travails they go through. But she was a great influence on him and helped him cut his pictures, and he was a master at that. And he went back in and recut the picture into its final form. And there's also kinds of other little interesting anecdotes about it, but the main thing is that this thing was hanging by a thread. And after he cut it, they released it in the 2 theaters. And basically, this film, if it was going to be a success, would have to be word of mouth, okay? And it shows him out in the lobby, and I can relate, standing out there listening to the audience, which is packed. There must be 3,000 people. It's one of those old-time theaters with the whole balcony and the whole 9 yards. And when it comes to, you might have heard the famous shower scene. It's giving me chills now. Nothing had ever been done like this on a number of levels. And I don't want to blow it for you, so we can talk about them later. But the screams that were coming out of that theater, and it was the entire audience. And I'm not talking eek, I'm talking fucking terror. And it lasts a long time, okay? And of course, it was immediate success. And it became his most successful film that he is tied to. Most people don't know about The Rear Window, which was also one of the films that holds up even today, and some of the other stuff he does. You could do a film festival. But Psycho was groundbreaking in so many ways, and it became a success. Why is that interesting? Well, because first you have to have a vision, and then you have to have the will to fulfill it. And when trouble comes along, as it inevitably will, you have to have the commitment and discipline and will to see it through. And it relates to us, what we're trying to do creatively. It's not an easy road, and it's not a path. If it was, everybody'd sign up for it, right? You do ABC, and then you're successful, and everybody goes, oh, I'm happy. That isn't the only example. How many of you know anything about the Beatles? There's a joke that some people are going through these old records in a store and go, wait, Paul McCartney was in a room before Wings? He was. The Beatles were the most successful rock group in the history of rock and roll music. And Hey Jude was one of their most successful albums. Well, Hey Jude, there was the first time they tried to do it, there was a furious argument between Paul and George over the guitar part. And when they finally cut the final track on July 31st, Paul started the track and then he didn't notice that nobody was on the drums. The drummer was in the bathroom and doesn't appear on the record until the 52nd point. And it became perfect. It was wonderful. It was an accident. How many of you have heard me say the acting gods will approach, and some of you go, no, wait, I got this, But the acting gods come in ways that we can't expect. Our part is to commit. Our part is to create and have faith in what we create and learn how to reshape it, because we learn by failure. Nothing that we give birth to creatively just comes, unless you're Beethoven or, no, Amadeus, I'm sorry, Mozart. You know, maybe there's a savant, you know, once in a jillion years that comes along in a particular format. But generally speaking, the way we learn is by a process of failure. That didn't work, let's try this. And these wonderful happy accidents, there's a story behind every painting, behind every film, behind every book, behind every work of art, behind everything that has the creative process. So that creative cauldron, which is messy and filled with trial and error and doubt and is unknowable and it is instinctual, is your best friend. And that's where we need to learn to live. It is an uncomfortable, comfortable place for us. So let's dive in.